The Heist at St. Mary's, Butch's Abduction. Butch was kind of shy and quiet, but he was an incredibly talented artist. And not just with cartoons. He also created otherworldly sculptures from wood and stone, and even painted panoramic scenes using polypores, those shelf fungi that grow on the side trees in the forest. He would use those as his canvases. He was invited to carve part of the totem pole for his tribe when he was only 13 years old, an honor never before bestowed upon someone so young. His artistic eye and ability to use natural mediums to enhance his vision was something that I hadn't seen before. And we became good friends. Plus, I really liked Iron Maiden too. If you grew up where I did, you knew about the dirty little secret that only came to light in recent years. That secret was, and still is, the sheer amount of abduction and human trafficking of children and young women that pretty much goes unchecked in plain sight in British Columbia. We all knew who Clifford Robert Olson was, and I was in grade 8 when he took one of my friend's little sisters. But for Native kids, it was even worse. Americans who don't know their own history always like to lecture me about the 60s scoop when I talk about how racist it is in the United States. But what many of them don't realize is that the scoop didn't stop in the 60s. And one of the last residential schools to close in British Columbia, St. Mary's, was located in Mission, BC, only a few towns away from where I grew up. We all heard the stories, but only a few of us had ever been out to see St. Mary's. I had just started grade 9 in secondary school when I first heard that Butch had been abducted. Mimi went to the neighboring junior high school, and she told me about it when we were playing together against each other in a grass hockey tournament. It happened in the middle of the night, and they would have taken her and her other brother Reuben too had they not been staying at their grandmother's place that night. We were both 14 at the time and not able to drive. So we met up with our friend June, who had horses. June and I had ridden her horses all the way out to Langley before when she and her sisters were competing at a rodeo. And Mission was much closer to home. We told June what we wanted to do, and she was down for the adventure. The three of us met at June's place early one Saturday morning, saddled up 2 horses, and rode out to Mission to scope out the infamous St. Mary's. June rode alone, and I rode with Mamie behind me. Picture a church crossed with a prison, crossed with an insane asylum. And that's what St. Mary's reminded me of. Nothing about it said school, and everything about it said internment camp. When we did see kids outside, they weren't playing. They were put to work, picking produce, sewing garments, hanging laundry, mowing lawns, washing cars, fixing engines, and none of it looked educational. All of their hair had been cut short, and they all wore clothes that looked like they were from the 1950s. Not school uniforms per se, but weirdly old-fashioned clothes, not like what the kids were wearing at the time in the early 80s. But what stood out the most was the expressions on their faces. They all looked so sad and confused and disheartened. And I'd had my own run-ins with the nuns at St. Mary's, the church, where my mom took me and made me attend service and Sunday school for several years before I finally got myself kicked out for arguing with a nun when I was 11. We continued to spy on the kids and the nuns, but we never saw Butch that day. We had to go back 2 more times before we saw him, and 4 more times after that before we could actually get him out. The first time we saw him, he had bruises on his face and on his arms, and a big cut on his lip. It looked like he'd been in a fight. But Butch had always been a quiet and gentle soul and never provoked anyone into fighting him. The injuries were obviously from an attack. Most likely one of the adults who was supposed to be there to care for him. He looked like he was in a daze, disassociated from where he was and what he was doing. He dropped the hamper of supplies that he'd been carrying, and the supplies went everywhere. I saw one of the nuns smack him hard with a riding crop right below his left elbow. "Look at the mess you made," she screeched. "Clean that up." We all saw the welt rise up on his arm, and I could feel those all too familiar rage tears welling up behind my eyes. "We got to get him out of there," I said to Mamie and June. They nodded in agreement. "What are we going to do?" June asked. Mamie and I looked at each other because we'd talk about what we'd do if we ever got the chance. So we put our heads together and hatched a plan.